Manhunt is scary at various levels. On the surface, the evanescent and somber soundtrack, mixed with the gross, flat scenario, leaves the player with a bitter feeling of loneliness and perdition. Soon after, the violence is shown without many scruples. As the game progresses, we have to face with hunters that gradually lose their humanity, arriving at the apparent final point where Cash's adventure should have ended, in a penitentiary full of psychos and, in general, mentally disturbed individuals. It's not over though, because then the protagonist has to deal with the corrupted police force of the city and the personal army of the mastermind behind all of this abomination. And if it wasn't enough, in the final confrontation, the player gets acquainted with Pigsy. We'll talk about him later. And the director himself. It's curious to notice that even the protagonist himself is scary, both for his impressive killing skills and for his inscrutability. It's quite safe to assume that he must have some kind of mental problem, but the most terrifying thing about him is his vengeance desire and the fact that he seems to care about no one. The only possible exception are his family members, but even in their case, we're not sure if he gets angry because they got killed or because Starkweather betrayed him. One thing I like a lot about this game is how, someway, it relies on the uncanny valley effect, but starting from actual humans. If you don't know what uncanny valley is, I'll try to explain it quickly. Basically, as humans we tend to trust other humans because they're similar to us, they're familiar. So it would be logical to think that the scariest things are the ones that have the smaller resemblance to us, but it isn't actually true. Think about the porcelain dolls or some realistic robots, you may be highly disturbed by them. One theory, which explains this effect, states that we feel like this because we perceive that there's something off, that what we're seeing isn't human, or, maybe, we feel as if that object should have a soul but it hasn't, it's inanimate. Usually the uncanny valley gets triggered by objects made to emulate humans, but Manhunt reverses the process, both psychologically and physically. In fact, the hunters are more or less all mentally unstable maniacs, and most of them like to paint their faces or put masks on. So we start from the hoods, relatively normal gangsters, wearing anonymous balaclavas, then we go on with the skins, racist and disturbed, that like to show their hockey masks, the innocents with their skulls and baby faces, and the smileys, well, you get it. This effect tends to disappear in the late phases of the game since we have to deal with cops, that are kinda reasonable people, and two paramilitary groups, which are less scary in my opinion. Well, no, probably the less frightening are the hoods cause they're a bunch of losers who can't even fight.
I'm gonna get this asshole and claim the bounty. Buy me a new car.
The war dogs in the Cerberus are more armed and prepared than most of the other hunters, but at least they kinda behave like normal humans. Obviously normal is a very relative word in this context, you know. In reality the uncanny valley returns violently with Pigsy, which I thinks is one of the best characters along with Starkweather and Cash. Pigsy is a very sad and terrifying shell of a human. In fact, he doesn't consider himself a human at all, he thinks he's a pig. Most probably he wasn't always like this, but the forced enrollment in Starkweather's works and the terrible conditions he was kept fucked up his mind for good. By the time Cash enters the scene, Pigsy is super unstable and unpredictable, moved just by an insatiable bloodlust. Literally, he's a cannibal. Meeting him face to face like that, without any warning, unarmed, while he's holding a damn chainsaw and running at you grunting and screaming, it's a horror experience difficult to forget. At least Cash put him out of his misery, be it an act of mercy or just a quick and sadistic way to dispose of him. But now we arrive to the real pig. I don't know if it's made purposely, but since the soundtrack of the last mission includes pig noises, and since it plays also during Starkweather's last stand, It almost hints at the fact that there's another swine besides Pigsy, even more dirty and repellent. Lionel Starkweather is the character that frightened me the most because he's painfully realistic. It's not a secret that snuff movies exist. Unfortunately, they're part of the rotten side of our world. We tend to ignore things like that because they seem inconceivable, but reality often overclasses fantasy. It wouldn't be surprising to see even worse shit coming from us compared to this game. Anyway, this is the strength I find in Manhunt. Personally, I was never particularly scared by spooky monsters, because I knew that they only belonged to storybooks. This, however, is much different. Ignoring the action moments and the badass way Cash manages to take his revenge, Manhunt offers us a raw depiction of a revolting side of humanity, dominated by vice, violence, and madness.